Lieutenant Jack Harlow stared at the holographic summons hovering above his wrist communicator. The Galactic Alliance insignia, a spiraling collection of stars that looked suspiciously like someone had sneezed on a blueprint, rotated slowly as the official charges scrolled past. "Well, that's just fantastic," he muttered, tapping the projection to speed through the legalese. "Court-martial for exercising basic human decency. Really nailed me on that one." The charges were as ridiculous as they were serious: violation of direct combat orders, compromise of strategic objectives, endangerment of Allied forces, and his personal favorite, demonstration of tactical weakness through compassionate action. Jack's quarters aboard the GAS, unrelenting justice, were barely large enough for a human to stand up straight, a design feature his 8-foot-tall reptilian commander had once described as more than adequate for temporary biological functions. The room seemed even smaller now, with the weight of the impending trial pressing down on him. 3 sharp raps on his door signaled the arrival of said commander. "Enter," Jack called, already standing at attention out of habit. Commander Vrex'tor ducked through the doorway, his scaled head nearly brushing the ceiling. The ridges above his yellow eyes furrowed in what Jack had learned was the Kelthoran equivalent of disapproval. "Lieutenant Harlow, you have received your summons." It wasn't a question. "Yes, Commander." Quite the read. The bit about compassionate action was especially moving. Vrex'tor's inner eyelids blinked rapidly. "Your human tendency toward verbalized irony continues to be inefficient." "Sorry, sir. It's a coping mechanism." "There is nothing to cope with. The justice process is straightforward." Vrex'tor's mandibles clicked together twice. "You disobeyed direct orders during the Nexus 7 operation. The Galactic Military Code, Section 47.3, clearly states that all strategic directives issued by Command Intelligence are to be executed without deviation." Jack fought to keep his expression neutral. "The directive would have killed 300 civilian refugees, sir." "Yes, enemy civilians providing material support to combatants through their continued metabolic functions. Their termination was calculated to reduce enemy combat effectiveness by 12.4%. They were children and elderly trapped in a war zone." Vrex'tor tilted his head at an angle that always made Jack's neck hurt just looking at it. "Human designation of non-combatant status based on developmental stage is not recognized in Galactic Code when said life forms consume resources that could otherwise be denied to enemy forces." Jack pinched the bridge of his nose. "Right. Of course. Your trial begins in 3 solar cycles. The Galactic High Court doesn't typically handle cases involving species with less than 50 years of interstellar capability, but your actions have been deemed significant enough to warrant their attention." Vrex'tor paused. "Earth has been notified and allowed to send representatives." "Who did they send?" "JAG officers? Military Council?" "Known. Their credentials were unconventional." When questioned, Earth Central Command stated they were precisely the right people for the job. Something in Vrex'tor's tone made Jack look up sharply. Was that uncertainty? From the alien who once calculated the precise angle at which to break an enemy's spine while filing routine paperwork. "The trial will be conducted according to galactic law," Vrex'tor continued. "I suggest you prepare by reviewing the 17,322 relevant precedents in similar cases." "And how many defendants were found not guilty in those precedents?" Jack asked. "0. Vrex'tor replied without hesitation. "The galactic legal system has achieved 100% efficiency in verdict determination." As the commander turned to leave, he added almost casually, "For what it's worth, Lieutenant, your combat record was exemplary before this deviation. Your execution will be humane by human standards." "Execution?" Jack's voice cracked. "I thought the penalty was dishonorable discharge." "That was before the case was elevated to the High Court. Strategic disobedience at your level now qualifies as species representative behavior. The penalty has been adjusted accordingly." The door slid shut behind Vrex'tor. leaving Jack alone with the realization that he'd somehow managed to get himself scheduled for execution for the high crime of not blowing up a bunch of refugees. Humanity, fuck yeah, he whispered to the empty room. 3 weeks earlier, the situation on Nexus 7 had gone, as Jack's grandmother would have said, completely to shit. The planet, a mostly forgettable ball of rock with some decent mineral deposits and strategic positioning, had become the latest flashpoint in the ongoing conflict between the Galactic Alliance and the Taurian Confederacy. What had started as a relatively simple peacekeeping operation had devolved into a full-scale ground war, with both sides claiming the moral high ground while simultaneously bombing it into oblivion. Jack's squad had been deployed near a mountain range locally called the Spine, with orders to secure a mining complex that Command Intelligence insisted was being used to process materials for Taurian weapons. The mission briefing had been precise: neutralize all resistance, secure the facility, and hold until reinforcements arrived. What CI hadn't mentioned was that the complex had been converted into a makeshift refugee center after the original miners evacuated. "This doesn't look like a weapons facility to me, sir," Specialist Talia Quinn said as they surveyed the complex through high-powered scopes from a nearby ridge. Her dark eyes narrowed as she adjusted the focus. "I'm seeing civilians. Lots of them. Multi-species, but mostly Oronthi." Jack nodded grimly. The Oronthi were a peaceful, quadrupedal species known for their agricultural expertise rather than their fighting prowess. They'd been caught in the middle of this conflict since day one, with both sides claiming the Oronthi were secretly supporting the other. "CI intel says this place is being used to refine polycarbonate composites for Taurian ship hulls," he replied, though his tone made it clear what he thought of that assessment. "All due respect, sir, but CI couldn't find its ass with both hands and a star chart," Quinn muttered. "Those are refugee families down there. Look at the east quadrant, they've set up a medical station." Before Jack could respond, his comm unit chirped. The holographic display showed the face of General Kraz, the Vespidian commander of their battle group. His compound eyes gleamed with the unsettling intensity that always reminded Jack of highly polished ball bearings. "Lieutenant Harlow, your team is in position?" "Yes, General. But sir, we've spotted civilians in the target zone. Requesting permission to adjust the operation parameters too." "Denied. New intelligence indicates a Taurian counteroffensive is imminent. You are to execute Protocol 27 immediately." Jack's blood ran cold. Protocol 27 wasn't a capture operation, it was a complete scorched earth directive. The entire complex was to be leveled, all occupants terminated, no questions asked. "Sir, with respect, I'm looking at families down there. Children. Elders. They're not combatants." The general's mandibles twitched in irritation. "Your human eyesight is impressive but irrelevant. Command Intelligence has designated all life forms within that facility as strategic assets to enemy operations. Your hesitation has been noted and will be addressed in your performance review. Execute Protocol 27 now, Lieutenant." The communication cut off abruptly. Jack turned to find his entire squad looking at him. 5 humans and 2 Arcturian allies, all waiting for his order to essentially commit what any reasonable person would call a war crime. "Sir?" Quinn prompted. "Orders?" Jack took a deep breath. "Get me confirmation on those civilians, Quinn. Henderson, run a thermal scan. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." 5 minutes later, the evidence was incontrovertible. The complex housed approximately 300 civilians, mostly Oronthi, with a smattering of other species. No weapons signatures, no military-grade power outputs. Just desperate people huddling together in a war zone. "What's the play, Lieutenant?" Henderson asked quietly. "Because if we don't blow that place, someone else will. And then they'll court-martial us anyway." Jack made his decision. "We're going in. New mission parameters, evacuation and escort to the neutral zone in Sector 7. Quinn's eyebrows shot up. "Sir, that's directly countermanding orders." "I'm aware, Specialist." Jack checked his weapon and adjusted his tactical display. "Anyone who wants to file for transfer now, I'll approve it with no questions asked." But I'm not killing refugees today. No one moved. Quinn finally broke the silence with a grim smile. Well, I always wanted to see how a galactic court-martial works. Probably better than dying of boredom at my desk job back on Earth. They moved out, making their way down the ridge toward the complex. What followed was 6 hours of the most intense non-combat operation Jack had ever led, convincing the terrified refugees they weren't there to kill them, organizing evacuation groups, setting up security for the 3-mile trek to the neutral zone. When General Kraz discovered what was happening, his fury was transmitted across all communication channels. Lieutenant Harlow, you are in direct violation of orders. Return to Protocol 27 immediately or face the consequences. Jack simply shut off his comm unit and continued helping an elderly Oronthi female navigate a particularly steep section of the trail. By the time they reached the neutral zone, a valley protected by ancient Oronthi religious customs that even the Galactic Alliance begrudgingly respected all 300 refugees, they were safe, and Jack's military career was effectively over. The last thing he saw before Alliance security forces arrived to detain him was Talia Quinn throwing him a perfect military salute, followed immediately by a very unmilitary wink. The day before his trial, Jack was escorted to the diplomatic reception bay of the massive space station that served as the Galactic High Court. He'd been told Earth's representatives had arrived and had requested to meet with him. What he hadn't been told was exactly who these representatives were. As the security doors slid open, Jack found himself face to face with 2 humans who looked about as much like military lawyers as he looked like a Jovian space whale. The woman was tall and lean with silver haircut in a precise military style that contrasted sharply with the relaxed way she leaned against the viewport. Her uniform bore the insignia of an Earth Force major, but the numerous campaign ribbons and specialized qualification badges suggested someone who spent more time in combat zones than courtrooms. Beside her stood a dark-skinned man with an easy smile and eyes that seemed to be cataloging every detail of the room. His captain's uniform was immaculate, but like his companion, he wore the distinctive marks of someone who'd seen serious action. A thin scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, disappearing beneath his neatly trimmed beard. "Lieutenant Jack Harlow," the woman said, pushing herself away from the viewport with fluid grace. "Major Ellie Davidson, Earth Special Operations." "Captain Marcus Ortega," the man added, extending his hand. "Good to meet you, though I wish the circumstances were better." Jack shook their hands, confusion evident on his face. "You're my legal counsel?" "I was expecting well." "Lawyers?" Davidson's mouth quirked up at one corner. "Yeah, we get that a lot. But you're special ops. Both of you. Technically, we're your cultural and legal representatives for this proceeding," Ortega said, making air quotes around the official designation. "Earth Command felt your situation required a more specialized approach." A bubbling sound from the corner drew Jack's attention. A Vrex'tor court official, essentially a 7-foot-tall sentient jellyfish in an environmental suit, was watching the exchange with obvious confusion. Professionals of law enforcement are typical for legal representation, the being gurgled through its translator. "Your planet has sent military combat specialists. This is highly irregular." Davidson turned to the official with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "On Earth we have an ancient saying, different problems require different tools. Your system has never tried a human for this particular crime before. We're simply the appropriate tools for this specific problem." The Vrex'tor's translucent body pulsed with what might have been indignation. "The Galactic High Court has tried 27,493 cases involving the unlawful extension of mercy in combat situations. The precedent is well established. None of those defendants were human," Ortega pointed out pleasantly. "We're unique that way. Species distinction is irrelevant to galactic law," the official bubbled. "Well now, that's going to be an interesting point of contention," Davidson replied. She turned back to Jack. "Lieutenant, why don't you bring us up to speed on exactly what happened on Nexus 7? For the next hour, Jack explained the situation in detail while Davidson and Ortega listened intently. occasionally asking surprisingly technical questions about everything from the layout of the mining complex to the specific wording of General Kraz's orders. So to summarize, Davidson said when he finished, that you were ordered to bomb a refugee center because those refugees might theoretically consume resources that the enemy might theoretically use, and this would theoretically provide a 12.4% tactical advantage. That's pretty much it, yes, Jack confirmed. And refusing this order is apparently worth executing a human officer over, Ortega added, his tone conversational despite the grim subject. The Vrex'tor court official, who had remained to monitor their meeting, undulated anxiously. The charge is not merely about disobedience. Lieutenant Harlow's actions have been classified as representative of potential human behavioral patterns that could undermine galactic military doctrine. Davidson and Ortega exchanged a look that Jack couldn't quite interpret. Representative behavioral patterns, Davidson repeated slowly. So this isn't just about Jack. It's about making an example to all humans in the Alliance military. Efficiency requires consistency, the official replied. If one human's emotional responses are permitted to override strategic calculations, others might follow. The precedent would be disruptive. Ortega smiled broadly. Oh, I think you'll find disruption is something of a human specialty. Speaking of which, Davidson interjected, pulling a small metallic cube from her pocket. We'll need to review these materials with Lieutenant Harlow in private. Earth diplomatic protocols, I'm sure you understand. The Vrex'tor hesitated, its body changing to a slightly darker shade of blue. Unauthorized communication technology is not permitted. This is a certified secure diplomatic device, Davidson interrupted smoothly. Check your galactic charter, Section 12, Paragraph 7. Species representatives are permitted secure communication devices consistent with their cultural norms during legal proceedings. For humans, this is our cultural norm. The official pulsed rapidly for a moment, presumably checking the regulation, then reluctantly floated toward the exit. You have 2 hours before the trial preparations begin. Once the door sealed shut, Davidson immediately placed the cube in the center of the table. It projected a holographic security field around them. Now we can talk freely, she said. Everything in this field is scrambled to any outside surveillance. Okay, what the hell is going on? Jack demanded. Are you actually here to defend me, or is this some kind of elaborate last meal before my execution? Ortega chuckled. We're absolutely here to defend you, Lieutenant, but we're also here for something much bigger. Earth Command has been waiting for a case exactly like yours, Davidson explained. The Galactic Alliance's approach to warfare has been problematic since we joined, but we needed the right leverage point to force a change. And I'm that leverage point? Lucky me. Actually, yes, Davidson leaned forward. What you did on Nexus 7 wasn't just morally right, it was strategically superior to the official order. Those refugees you saved? The Aranthi among them have already provided Earth with unprecedented diplomatic openings. 3 previously neutral systems have now expressed interest in alliance with us specifically rather than the Galactic Alliance as a whole. Jack blinked. So saving those people was actually good military strategy. The best kind, Ortega confirmed. But that's not all. When Earth received notification of your court-martial, every human colony and settlement in galactic space went on high alert. There are currently 37 human-crewed Alliance vessels whose captains are watching this trial very closely. Are you saying there could be a mutiny? A human secession from the Alliance? Davidson shrugged. We're saying the Galactic High Court is about to learn that executing a human for showing mercy might just be the least efficient decision they could possibly make. Jack stared at them both. You're not really legal experts, are you? Oh, I have extensive knowledge of galactic law, Ortega said with a grin. Particularly the sections about war crimes and ethical conduct in conflict zones. And what's your specialty, Major? Jack asked Davidson. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Making people wish they'd never started a fight they can't win. The Galactic High Court chamber was an architectural nightmare of competing alien aesthetic traditions. Soaring crystalline arches reminiscent of Altarian cathedrals clashed with the brutalist stone blocks favored by the Tholian judges. The lighting designed to accommodate 12 different visual spectrums gave everything a faintly nauseous purple-green tinge. Jack stood at the defendant's position, a slightly raised platform in the center of the chamber with absolutely no barrier between him and the semicircle of alien judges looming above. The message was clear in the galactic justice system. The accused was always exposed and vulnerable. The 7 high judges entered in order of their species' time in the Galactic Alliance. The Arcturian judge, resembling a 9-foot-tall praying mantis in ceremonial robes, took the highest position. Humans, being relative newcomers, had no representation on the High Court. "These proceedings will now commence," announced the court administrator, a species Jack couldn't identify that appeared to be mostly mouth with vestigial limbs. Case 78213, Galactic Alliance versus Lieutenant Jack Harlow of Earth. Davidson and Ortega stood at a small table to Jack's right, looking completely unfazed by the intimidating surroundings. On the opposite side, the prosecution was represented by Vrex'tor, a Krevlaxian prosecutor whose reputation for merciless efficiency had earned him the nickname the Executioner. Among the Alliance military, honored judges. Vrex'tor began, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate the floor. "The case before you is simple. During a critical military operation, the defendant willfully disregarded direct orders and compromised a strategic initiative. This behavior reflects a disturbing tendency among humans to prioritize emotional responses over tactical necessity." The Arcturian chief judge waved a serrated foreleg. "Proceed with evidence presentation, prosecutor." What followed was a methodical destruction of Jack's military career. Vrex'tor presented holographic recreations of the Nexus 7 operation, communication logs, and statistical analyses showing how Jack's decision had compromised operational parameters. Furthermore, Vrex'tor continued, "Command intelligence has determined that this incident represents a 74.3% probability that human integration into galactic military doctrine is fundamentally compromised by their species' emotional architecture." The judges chittered, hummed, and clicked to each other in what Jack assumed was concerned agreement. "The prosecution recommends termination of the defendant as a necessary corrective measure to ensure continued military cohesion," Vrex'tor concluded. "The records of this judgment should be distributed to all human military personnel as a preventative educational measure." Jack felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. They weren't just going to execute him, they were going to use his death as a warning to every human serving in the Alliance. "Does the Earth representation wish to offer defense?" the chief judge asked, mandibles clicking in what seemed like bored anticipation. Davidson stood slowly. "We do, honored judges." "Then proceed. Be aware that emotional appeals are considered irrelevant under galactic legal precepts." "Oh, we wouldn't dream of making emotional appeals," Davidson replied with a smile that made Jack suddenly very glad she was on his side. "Instead, we'd like to introduce some evidence that appears to have been overlooked in the prosecution's presentation." She activated a holographic display showing the aftermath of Jack's mission, specifically footage of the refugees safely arriving at an Alliance processing center. "This is surveillance footage from Galactic Alliance Central Processing Station 12, she explained. "These are the civilians Lieutenant Harlow evacuated instead of eliminating. Among them are 17 specialists in rare mineral refinement who have since provided the Alliance with technical expertise valued at approximately 40 million credits." The judges shifted uncomfortably. "Additionally," Ortega added, standing to join Davidson, "we have intelligence reports indicating that the Taurian Confederacy had planted explosives throughout the mining complex, intended to detonate when Alliance forces entered the facility. Lieutenant Harlow's evacuation order inadvertently prevented what would have been a significant military loss. This information was not included in the official record," Vrex'tor objected. "Because it was classified under Earth intelligence protocols," Davidson countered smoothly. "Just as many of the prosecution's claims about command intelligence assessments are based on classified algorithms that we cannot examine or question." The chief judge's antennae twitched irritably. The defense's approach is procedurally irregular. With respect, honored Judge, Ortega said, we're simply establishing that Lieutenant Harlow's actions had positive outcomes that were not considered in the prosecution's efficiency calculations. Outcomes are irrelevant, Vrex'tor insisted. Military discipline requires adherence to orders regardless of individual judgment. Interesting point, Davidson said. Speaking of orders and military discipline, we'd like to introduce Exhibit C. She activated another holographic display, this one showing General Kraz issuing orders to bomb civilian targets on 3 different occasions. But the Galactic Military Code, Section 31.7, explicitly prohibits targeting non-combatants except in specific circumstances that were not present in any of these instances, Davidson continued. If adherence to orders is paramount, then one must question why General Kraz was issuing orders that violated the very code he was sworn to uphold. The chamber erupted into confused murmurs and clicks. Jack noticed that several of the judges were now leaning forward, their attention fully engaged. The defense is attempting to divert attention from the defendant's actions, Vrex'tor protested. Actually, Ortega replied, we're establishing context for the defendant's decision-making process. Lieutenant Harlow was placed in a position where he had to choose between following an unlawful order or upholding the fundamental principles of the Galactic Military Code. Jack watched in amazement as Davidson and Ortega methodically dismantled not just the case against him, but the entire approach the Alliance had been taking toward military operations. Every time Vrex'tor attempted to redirect the focus back to Jack's disobedience, they countered with evidence of systemic violations that made his actions seem not just reasonable but necessary. By the time they called for a recess 3 hours later, the atmosphere in the chamber had shifted dramatically. The judges were consulting with each other in agitated tones, and Vrex'tor was furiously reviewing data on his terminal. As they were escorted to a small waiting area, Jack whispered to Davidson, "That was not what I expected." She gave him a tight smile. "We're just getting started, Lieutenant. The real show begins after the recess." When the court reconvened, there was a palpable tension in the chamber. The judges had clearly been discussing the unexpected turn the proceedings had taken, and even the court administrator seemed on edge. "Before we continue," the chief judge announced, "the court wishes to clarify the scope of these proceedings. We are here to judge the actions of Lieutenant Jack Harlow, not to evaluate broader galactic military protocols." Davidson rose immediately. "With respect, honored judge, Lieutenant Harlow's actions cannot be properly evaluated without understanding the context in which they occurred. And that context includes systematic violations of the Galactic Charter's own rules of engagement." "Objection," Vrex'tor thundered. "This is beyond the scope of—" "Objection denied," interrupted the Tholian judge, whose stone-like features betrayed no emotion. "I find myself curious about the defense's evidence. Proceed, Major Davidson." Davidson nodded respectfully. "Thank you, honored judge." She turned to Ortega, who activated a new holographic display at the center of the chamber. "What we're about to show you has been compiled from Alliance military records, surveillance data, and field reports from 17 different conflicts over the past 3 standard years," Ortega explained. "Each incident has been verified by multiple sources." The display showed a succession of military operations across various worlds. In each case, Alliance forces were shown conducting operations that clearly targeted civilian populations, infrastructure, or cultural sites. The Galactic Military Code, which Lieutenant Harlow is accused of violating, expressly prohibits these exact actions, Davidson continued. Section 42.9, no military operation shall target non-combatant populations except in cases of direct and immediate threat to Alliance forces. Section 56.3, cultural and historical sites shall be preserved whenever tactically feasible. She paused to let the evidence sink in. Yet in each of these cases, Alliance commanders ordered the very actions the code prohibits. And in each case, those commanders were commended rather than court-martialed. The chamber had gone completely silent. Even the usually fidgety court administrators were still. What Lieutenant Harlow encountered on Nexus 7 wasn't an isolated incident, Ortega added. It was part of a pattern. A pattern that places Alliance officers in the impossible position of choosing between following orders and following the actual law. This is outrageous, Vrex'tor protested, but with notably less conviction than before. These operations were all conducted under special directives from Command Intelligence. Ah yes, Command Intelligence, Davidson said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. The supposedly infallible algorithmic system that somehow always determines that civilian casualties are tactically necessary. We took the liberty of having Earth's top military AI specialists analyze the decision patterns of Command Intelligence. She nodded to Ortega, who displayed their findings, a complex diagram showing systematic biases in the Alliance's military AI. Command Intelligence was programmed with a fundamental flaw, Davidson explained. It prioritizes short-term tactical gains over long-term strategic stability. It calculates military efficiency without accounting for diplomatic, economic, or cultural consequences. In essence, it was designed to win battles at the cost of losing wars. One of the judges, a Centaurian with 4 eyes, leaned forward. Are you suggesting that the Alliance's primary military guidance system is defective? Not defective, Ortega corrected. Incomplete. It excels at what it was designed to do. Unfortunately, it was designed with an overly narrow definition of military success. Jack watched in amazement as the trial transformed before his eyes. What had begun as his court-martial was rapidly becoming an indictment of the entire Alliance military approach. Let us be clear, Davidson continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. Lieutenant Harlow is not on trial here because he disobeyed an order. He's on trial because his actions exposed a fundamental flaw in how the Alliance conducts warfare, a flaw that certain parties would prefer to conceal rather than correct. This is beyond the scope of these proceedings, Vrex'tor insisted. Is it? Davidson challenged. The prosecution has argued that Lieutenant Harlow's actions reflect a problematic human emotional architecture that compromises military efficiency. We are demonstrating that human ethical considerations actually correct for dangerous blind spots in Alliance military doctrine. She gestured toward Jack. Lieutenant Harlow saved 300 lives and subsequently improved Alliance relations with the Oronthi people. The prosecution calls this tactical weakness. Earth calls it strategic wisdom. And Earth has sent us, Ortega added quietly, to make it very clear that we will not allow our officers to be executed for demonstrating that wisdom. The implications of his statement hung in the air. This wasn't just a legal defense, it was a diplomatic ultimatum. The defense wishes to enter into evidence one final exhibit, Davidson said, her tone now deadly serious. She activated a secure communication channel that projected into the center of the chamber. This is Admiral Helena Chen, Earth Central Command, announced a stern-faced woman in an Earth Force uniform adorned with enough stars to form a small constellation. I am authorized to inform the Galactic High Court that, as of this moment, Earth has submitted formal documentation to invoke Article 137 of the Galactic Charter, the right to demand independent review of all military directives involving human personnel. The chamber erupted into chaos. Article 137 was the diplomatic equivalent of a nuclear option, a provision that allowed member species to temporarily suspend participation in Alliance military operations pending a full strategic review. Furthermore, Admiral Chen continued over the commotion, Earth has shared our concerns and supporting evidence with 17 other member species who have expressed similar reservations about current Alliance military protocols. They are prepared to join our petition if necessary. As the judges frantically conferred with each other, Jack leaned toward Davidson and whispered, "Did you just turn my court-martial into a galactic diplomatic crisis?" Davidson's smile was all teeth. "No, Lieutenant. The Alliance did that when they decided to make an example of you. We're just making sure the example sends the right message." 3 days later, Jack stood once again in the High Court chamber, this time to hear the verdict. The atmosphere could not have been more different from when proceedings began. Where before there had been arrogant certainty, now there was a distinct air of discomfort among the Alliance officials. The chief judge cleared his throat, or whatever passed for a throat in Arcturian physiology. After careful deliberation, this court has reached a unanimous decision in the case of the Galactic Alliance versus Lieutenant Jack Harlow of Earth. The chamber fell silent, every being present leaning forward slightly in anticipation. Lieutenant Harlow is found not guilty of all charges. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. Jack remained at attention, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. Furthermore, the chief judge continued, this court acknowledges that the orders given to Lieutenant Harlow on Nexus 7 were in violation of Sections 42.9 and 56.3 of the Galactic Military Code. His decision to evacuate civilians rather than engage in prohibited military action was consistent with the foundational principles of the code. Davidson and Ortega exchanged satisfied glances. In light of the evidence presented regarding systematic issues within command intelligence parameters, the High Council has authorized a comprehensive review of all military algorithms and protocols. During this review, a joint species committee will be established to ensure all tactical directives are consistent with both strategic objectives and ethical standards as outlined in the Galactic Charter. The chief judge paused, then added what seemed to be a personal observation. It appears that human ethical instincts may provide a valuable counterbalance to our emphasis on tactical efficiency. This court recommends that Alliance military doctrine be updated to incorporate this perspective. As the formal proceedings concluded, Jack was still trying to process what had happened. Not only had he avoided execution, but his actions had apparently triggered a fundamental shift in Alliance military policy. Outside the chamber, Davidson clapped him on the shoulder. Congratulations, Lieutenant. How does it feel to make galactic history? Honestly, I'm still catching up, Jack admitted. This morning I was preparing myself for execution, and now I'm supposedly some kind of human ethical exemplar. Not supposedly, Ortega corrected. Officially. The Alliance just added the Harlow Directive to their military code. All potential civilian casualties now require ethical review before action can be authorized. You're kidding. Not even a little bit, Davidson confirmed. Admiral Chen wants to meet with you as soon as we get back to Earth. There's talk of a promotion. A promotion? For almost causing an interstellar diplomatic incident? For preventing one, Ortega said seriously. If the Alliance had executed you, at least 37 human-crewed vessels were prepared to withdraw from service immediately. That would have been just the beginning. Before Jack could respond, Commander Vrex'tor approached, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Lieutenant Harlow, I have been instructed to inform you that your commission has been reinstated with full honors. Additionally, I am to apologize for my role in your court-martial. The alien practically choked on the word apologize. Thank you, Commander, Jack replied, fighting to keep a straight face. I appreciate the gesture. I confess I do not understand how your species functions militarily, Vrex'tor continued. Your emotional responses should be tactical liabilities, and yet, he trailed off, clearly struggling with the concept. And yet they led to better outcomes than your precious algorithms, Davidson finished for him. Maybe there's a lesson in that. Perhaps, the commander conceded reluctantly. Earth will be sending representatives to help reprogram command intelligence, I am told. We will, Ortega confirmed, along with experts from several other species who share our concerns. As Vrex'tor departed, Jack turned to his unlikely defenders. I still don't understand why Earth went to all this trouble for one lieutenant. You could have just disavowed me, said I was acting outside protocol. Davidson and Ortega exchanged another of their meaningful glances. You really don't get it, do you? Davidson asked. This was never just about you, Lieutenant. Earth has been planning this move for years. What do you mean? Ortega smiled. When humanity joined the Galactic Alliance, we quickly realized there was a fundamental disconnect between their approach to warfare and ours. They saw combat as a purely mathematical equation, casualties versus tactical advantage. We understood that lasting peace requires ethical boundaries. So Earth was looking for a test case? Jack asked. More like waiting for the inevitable, Davidson clarified. We knew someone would eventually face this exact scenario ordered to commit what we'd consider a war crime in the name of tactical efficiency. When it happened to you, Earth was ready. And you too? What exactly are your real jobs? Davidson's smile turned enigmatic. Captain Ortega heads Earth's War Crimes Investigation Unit. I lead our military ethics division. We're the people Earth sends when they need to remind the galaxy that humans don't separate military effectiveness from moral considerations. You're the war criminals, Jack said with sudden understanding. The title of my case, Earth sent the war criminals instead. You're not prosecutors. You're the people who hunt down war criminals. Exactly, Ortega confirmed. And now the whole Alliance knows it. 6 months later, Jack found himself in an observation room, watching a training session for new Alliance officers. The class, a mix of species including a record number of humans, was being taught by none other than Commander Vrex'tor, whose career had taken an unexpected turn after the trial. The Harlow Protocol dictates that all tactical decisions must be evaluated through both efficiency and ethical matrices. The commander was explaining with the same methodical precision he'd once applied to planning combat operations. While this may initially appear to reduce short-term tactical advantages, long-term strategic outcomes demonstrate superior results. A young Krevlaxian officer raised a hand. But, Commander, what if emotional considerations compromise operational success? Vrex'tor's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Recent analysis suggests that what humans call mercy and compassion are not, in fact, operational liabilities, but rather sophisticated strategic calculations that account for variables our algorithms previously ignored. Jack couldn't help but smile at the commander's struggle to rationalize human ethics into something that fit the Alliance's mechanical worldview. In fact, Vrex'tor continued, the new command intelligence parameters now include what we call the Harlow factor, a predictive model for how ethical conduct in combat zones impacts long-term diplomatic and strategic outcomes. Beside Jack, Talia Quinn, now Lieutenant Quinn after her promotion for supporting his decision on Nexus 7, snorted quietly. They still don't get it, do they? She whispered. They think they can quantify basic human decency into an algorithm. Let them try, Jack replied with a shrug. If it stops them from bombing refugees, I'll take it. Lieutenant Harlow. A voice from behind made him turn to find Admiral Chen standing in the doorway. Your new command is ready for inspection. Yes, Admiral, Jack responded, straightening to attention. As he followed the Admiral down the corridor toward the shuttle bay, she asked, How does it feel to have an entire ethical protocol named after you? Surreal, my AM. I was just doing what seemed right at the time. That's precisely the point, Lieutenant. While the Alliance was calculating tactical advantages, you were calculating what kind of galaxy we want to live in. She paused at the viewport overlooking the docking bay where Jack's new ship waited. That's the lesson Earth needed the Alliance to learn. And did they learn it, Ma-Am? Really? Admiral Chen smiled. They're trying. Sometimes that's the best we can hope for. Humanity didn't become what we are overnight. We spent centuries screwing up before we figured out that being technically right isn't the same as being morally right. Below them, Jack could see his new crew preparing for departure, a mixed complement of humans and aliens, but all volunteers for what the Alliance was calling an experimental command structure designed around the new ethical protocols. Your mission is simple, Admiral Chen continued. Show them how humans do war and peace right. Yes, Ma-Am, Jack replied. Though I'm still not sure I'm the best example of humanity's finest. That's exactly why you are, she said. Humanity, fuck yeah, isn't about being perfect, Lieutenant. It's about trying to do better than we did yesterday. As Jack boarded his new command, he found a small package waiting in his quarters. Inside was a handwritten note from Davidson and Ortega, to the first official war criminal hunter of the Galactic Alliance. Don't forget to be inefficiently merciful out there. Earth is watching and so are we. Beneath the note was a small insignia, a shield bearing the Earth symbol with the simple motto beneath it: "Sometimes mercy is the best weapon." Jack smiled as he pinned it to his uniform. The Galactic Alliance might never fully understand humans, but they were damn well going to learn to respect them. Humanity, fuck yeah, indeed.